It had been years since I last visited my grandparents. After college and work took over my life, I barely found time for myself, let alone long trips to the quiet countryside. But when Grandpa called last month, his voice oddly urgent and soft, I knew I had to go. "We miss you, sweetheart," he said, "and your grandmother. She's been telling the spirits you're coming." I laughed nervously, thinking it was one of his usual ghost story jokes. He'd always been like that, eccentric, theatrical, always whispering eerie tales by candlelight when I was a kid. Grandma, too. They loved all things paranormal. I used to think it was cute. Their house sat at the end of a narrow gravel road, surrounded by woods that seemed thicker than I remembered. The front porch creaked as I stepped onto it, and even though it was barely 4 p.m., the trees had already cast the whole property in a gloomy shade. Grandma opened the door with a warm smile, her thin frame wrapped in a knitted shawl, but behind her glasses, her eyes looked tired, almost hollow. "You came," she whispered. "The house is so excited." I wasn't sure I heard her right, but before I could ask, Grandpa appeared behind her, ushering me in like I was royalty. The interior was exactly as I remembered. Floral wallpaper peeling at the edges, antique lamps casting a soft golden hue, and shelves packed with old books, most of them about ghosts, hauntings, and spiritual folklore. After dinner, as darkness fell outside, Grandpa lit a single candle in the living room and sat in his usual rocking chair. Grandma brought over 2 mugs of tea, and I joined them on the couch. "It's time for a story," Grandpa said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "A new one the spirits told us last night." I smiled politely, expecting a spooky tale about haunted wells or vengeful spirits, like always. But this one was different. He began describing a traveler, a lone visitor who returned home after many years. How the house, starved of stories for so long, began to stir with hunger. How the walls listened, how the shadows remembered. He didn't know he was part of the story, Grandpa whispered, leaning forward, until it was far too late. I chuckled nervously, glancing at Grandma. She was staring at me, not blinking, as if waiting for something. As the candle flickered violently, I felt the first cold breath on the back of my neck, and I swear, just for a second, I saw someone standing behind me in the reflection of the window. But when I turned around, there was nothing there, just the darkness outside, and the house, groaning softly like it was breathing. I didn't sleep well that night. The house made sounds, not the kind you can write off as old building noises. These were rhythmic, intentional. Footsteps in the hallway at 2:37 a.m., a slow knock on my bedroom door at 3:13. When I opened it, no one was there, just the long, narrow hallway, dimly lit by the antique wall sconce that flickered like it was trying to warn me. The next morning, over breakfast, I asked Grandpa if he or Grandma had been up during the night. He shook his head. "No, we always sleep through the night. It must have been the house settling, or ... He paused with a smirk. "Maybe one of the others checking in on you." "Others?" I asked. "Oh, just some of the old stories lingering about," he said with a wink. "Don't worry, they're harmless. Mostly." Grandma remained silent, buttering her toast with delicate precision, her eyes never leaving the window. That day, I wandered through the house. Something felt off. The photos in the hallway, ones I vaguely remembered, now had smudged faces. Every portrait had the eyes scratched out or blurred, as though the subjects had tried to disappear from memory. In the living room, I noticed the grandfather clock had stopped at exactly midnight. When I tried to wind it, it refused to tick. Instead, I heard what sounded like distant whispering coming from inside its hollow frame. By late afternoon, I found a door I didn't remember. An old wooden one under the staircase, hidden behind an ornate tapestry of some Victorian seance. It was locked. When I asked Grandma about it, she turned pale. "That room is not for you," she said flatly. "We keep it shut for a reason." Later that evening, as dusk fell and the house dimmed again, Grandpa brought out another candle, ready for another story. But this time, he didn't sit. He stood behind my chair as he began to speak, and his voice sounded unfamiliar. "There are places," he said slowly, "where the veil is thinner. Where stories don't just get told, they get trapped, played on loop, like ghosts performing for the dark." I looked up. His eyes seemed distant, glassy. And as he told the tale of a boy who wandered into a cursed house that fed off fear, I realized something terrifying. He was describing me. Even the small details, the car I drove, the shirt I wore yesterday, the conversette. The boy didn't understand yet, Grandpa whispered, but the house was learning him, and soon it would tell him what it wanted. Suddenly, the candle went out. The room was pitch dark, and behind me, I heard a low, guttural breath that didn't belong to anyone in that room. I didn't move. I couldn't. That breath behind me, it was wrong. Wet, slow, and too close to my ear, like something leaning in from the darkness just to let me know it was real. Then, the candle flickered back to life on its own. Grandpa and Grandma were both seated again, sipping tea as if nothing had happened. "You all right, dear?" Grandma asked with a smile, though her hand trembled slightly on the cup. "You looked like you saw something." I nodded slowly, not trusting my voice. That night, I locked my door. Twice. It was just past midnight when I heard the voices. They weren't loud, more like a conversation in another room, muffled but steady. Curious, I slipped out of bed and crept toward the stairs, making sure to avoid the creaky spots I remembered from childhood. The living room was dimly lit. Candlelight again. They must have lit it after I went to bed. From behind the half-open door, I saw them. Grandma and Grandpa sat at the round table. Across from them sat two others, a man in a tattered suit and a woman in a dark morning dress from another era. Pale, stiff. Their faces were expressionless, yet they seemed to be listening. "The boy is almost ready," Grandpa said quietly. "He just needs to see." The woman's head turned slightly, toward me. Her eyes were hollow, black. My heart leapt into my throat. I stumbled back, knocking over a vase from the hallway table. The crash echoed like a thunderclap. When I looked back toward the living room, the candle was out. Empty chairs. No one at the table. Only silence. Then, slowly, I heard creaking floorboards behind me. A long shadow stretched along the hallway wall, moving without a source. I ran. I locked myself in my room again, heart pounding. In the morning, neither Grandma nor Grandpa mentioned the noise, the vase, or the guests. Instead, Grandma placed a journal on the breakfast table. "It's time you learned what this house is," she said, sliding it toward me. "What it asks of us." The leather cover was cracked and stained. On the first page, scrawled in an uneven hand, "Every story feeds it. Every fear shapes it. It lives on what we remember and what we try to forget." At the bottom of the page, a signature I didn't recognize. Or rather, I almost recognized it. My mother's handwriting. But she'd been gone for 10 years, and she never spoke of her parents. The journal was the tipping point. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The house, the stories, the strange behavior of my grandparents. It was all starting to make sense in a way that terrified me. I had to know the truth. That afternoon, I decided to confront the locked door under the staircase, the one my grandmother had warned me about. The house was strangely quiet as I walked down the narrow corridor. The low hum of the wind outside had gone completely still, and the shadows in the corners of the hall seemed to lengthen, as if watching my every move. I stood in front of the door. It was old, made of dark wood, the handle twisted and worn. I ran my fingers along its surface, feeling the coolness of it under my skin. Something shifted within the walls, like the house was breathing deeper. I knew the key must be nearby. Grandma was always meticulous about keeping things locked away. I found it in the small drawer near the kitchen, buried under a stack of old receipts. The key was heavy, tarnished with age, and when I inserted it into the lock, it clicked with an unsettling finality. The door opened slowly with a groan. Inside was darkness, thick, suffocating. The air smelled stale, like it hadn't been disturbed for years. I pulled out my phone, turning on the flashlight, and stepped inside. The room was small and cramped. But what I found there? It shouldn't have been there. Along the walls were dozens of old photographs, all crammed into cracked frames, pictures of strangers, their faces hidden beneath layers of dust. But they weren't just any strangers. They were too familiar. Each photo showed someone I recognized from my childhood. Neighbors, family friends, even old teachers. But each person looked wrong. Their eyes were wide, too bright, and they all wore the same vacant, empty expressions. One photo in particular stood out. It was of a young woman with pale blonde hair, wearing a wedding dress. I stared at her for a long time, trying to place her. And then it hit me. It was my mother. But she was smiling in the photo, a smile I had never seen her wear. It was as if she knew something I didn't. My hands began to shake. I turned away from the photo, but my eyes kept darting back to it. Something about it didn't sit right. Then, in the corner of the room, I noticed something else. A bookcase, its shelves packed with old volumes. I stepped toward it, the wood creaking under my feet. But when I reached out to touch the books, they seemed to shift. I pulled one free, and as I did, the bookcase creaked open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, there was a dusty journal, identical to the one Grandma had shown me earlier. This one, however, was different. The pages were covered in strange symbols, handwritten in a frantic, almost panicked hand. And at the very end of the journal, a final entry caught my eye. The house isn't just haunted, it feeds on our memories, our stories. It takes us, little by little. And when we're gone, it will consume everyone we ever knew. I froze. The words were a warning. But by the time I'd read them, I had already realized the terrifying truth. I was part of the story now. The house knew me. It's already too late. The last line read, "Once you step inside, there is no leaving." I felt the weight of the journal in my hands, but it wasn't the book itself that made me tremble. It was the realization that everything I had experienced in this house, every whisper, every shadow, every unsettling glance from my grandparents, it had all been part of something far darker. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive. The faintest movement from behind me made me freeze. My breath caught in my throat. I slowly turned to face the door. Grandpa was standing there watching me. His face was pale, almost translucent, as if the light in the room could barely touch him. He hadn't made a sound, but his presence in that doorway was suffocating. "I see you've found it," he said quietly. His voice was a strange mix of sadness and something else, something darker. "The truth, and now you understand." I backed away from him, heart pounding. The walls seemed to close in around me, as if the house itself was pushing me into the room. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," Grandpa continued, his voice lowering to a whisper. "We didn't mean for you to become part of it. But once you came here, it claimed you. It feeds on what we give it, on the memories we share." Grandma appeared behind him, her face expressionless, her eyes glistening with something that looked like regret. "We never wanted you to suffer like this," she said softly. "But it was too late the moment you stepped in. It's been waiting for you, waiting for someone young enough to remember everything. I shook my head, panic rising in my chest. What are you talking about? What is this place? Grandpa's face twisted, and for a brief moment, I saw something inhuman lurking beneath his old skin. Something hungry. It's not just a house. It's a vessel, a place where memories come to life, where the past never fades. Every story told here is absorbed. Every fear becomes its strength. We were the first to discover it long ago. We thought we could control it, but he trailed off, as if he had lost the words. Suddenly the lights flickered, and I felt the temperature in the room drop. A deep, unnatural cold settled in my bones, and then, from somewhere deep within the house, came the sound of scraping. A low, grating noise like something was dragging itself across the floor. It wasn't the house settling this time. This was something alive. Grandma stepped forward, her voice trembling. You need to leave, before it sees you, before it knows you. I turned to run, but the hallway stretched impossibly long in front of me. The walls, the ceilings, everything seemed to pulse and breathe. I stumbled, nearly falling over as I tried to race toward the front door, but the door wouldn't budge. The walls started whispering my name, over and over, in voices I recognized but couldn't place. My mother's voice, Grandpa's voice, strangers I had forgotten about, all calling my name, begging me to come back, to stay. I pressed against the door with all my strength, but it wouldn't open. I heard footsteps, heavy, dragging footsteps, getting closer from behind me. I turned to face them. At first, I couldn't see anything, just the darkness that had consumed the hallway. But then I saw it. A figure, tall, looming, shadowed. It wasn't human. It was an amalgamation of memories, of every face, every lost moment the house had ever consumed. It was made of fragments, stitching itself together in a grotesque, shifting mass. A face, 1,000 faces, pressed against the walls, forming and disappearing in a blur of eyes and mouths. You're the final one, it hissed, its voice 1,000 voices overlapping. The one that will complete the story, the one that will make it whole. I screamed and shoved my shoulder into the door, desperate. Then, suddenly, it gave way. The door swung open, and I stumbled outside, gasping for air. The cool night air hit me like a slap in the face. The house stood behind me, silent once more, but I could feel the eyes of... I didn't look back as I ran to my car. I couldn't. The figure, the whispering, everything was still in my head, chasing me, pulling me back. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The house stood in the distance, looming like a shadow. And then I saw it. In the upper window, there was someone standing. Not Grandma, not Grandpa. A young woman in a wedding dress. My mother. She was smiling, that same eerie, knowing smile.